There we go. Right. So sorry about that. Sorry for the interference. It's something unusual to have happened, but for whatever reason. So again, just saying, that Baba's knowledge is very specifically for us, and it is a new knowledge. And you could say that, as is the case with new knowledge or new information in terms of science or any other discipline, that we are experimenting with this new or godly knowledge in the laboratory that is our lives. And the knowledge, applied knowledge, is in every sphere. There's nothing to which knowledge cannot be applied or is not relevant. Now, when experiments are carried out and there's a result, and perhaps it's written up in some journal or whatever, then the next thing is that others in that field will endeavor to get the same result, that they will experiment, and sometimes it's seen that even though it was written up in a journal, that in trying to replicate it, scientists didn't arrive at the same conclusion. And so for us, we are those scientists that have formulated the experiment. This is our thesis. And so each one's life becomes, if you like, a proof of the knowledge, the applied knowledge. Now, when it comes to knowledge, do I have to understand it in order to apply it? Perhaps, like me, many others too would have applied it before they understood it, and sometimes it is seeing the proof in someone else or in others that inspires me to actually take it up. And I'm remembering when coming to Gyan, I was only 4 months in Gyan, not accepting it. Never mind not accepting it. You think you're not accepting it, but the truth of it is you haven't understood it in order to be able to accept it. And when I got to Madhavan, even though I would not have called myself a Brahmin by any stretch of the imagination at that point, but I was seeing in particular Daddy Kamarka. I was already very fond of Daddy Janki in London, but this was Daddy G and Didi, the first Didi, as far as I'm concerned. And it was very evident their wisdom and their love. And I was not only touched by it, but it made me realize that there was something I wasn't getting. There was something they had and were privy to and embodied that I was missing. How did they do that? How did they become like they were? And of course, as I was saying, that the ears that are listening to Baba's knowledge and understand it are 5,000-year-old ears. But each set of ears has gone through different experiences. And so we arrive back at Baba's door with a variety of filters. There is something still within us that is left over from the last confluence age that draws us back again and attracts us. But then the process of letting go, or actually being aware of all of those influences and false understanding or beliefs, takes time. And so in all of that, you see Baba's infinite patience with us and his respect that never ever imposes, even though he knows it's the truth, but he never imposes that on us. And so it was still in those weeks that I was in Madhaban that I was gifted, if you like, undeservedly so, with an intense experience in meditation that took me to a place that I could never have imagined. Yes, beyond and self-realization and God realization and all of that, you know. And it was like the proverbial pieces of the puzzle slotting into place. In other words, now there was an understanding of the nature of cyclical time, and that God was real, and that there could be this communication. But it wasn't 100% understanding. That, I think, comes slowly and gently, not necessarily for everyone. Some instantly embrace and never question, and yet I find myself enjoying this, if you like, slow burn, this delicate journey of unfolding and of coming to know the self. And so always this invitation from God to understand. He never forces us to believe, but that we have to understand. So when it comes to this thing of applying Gyan accurately, then I don't think it's a question that souls are applying it mistakenly, deliberately. That it really is a question simply of experience versus less experience. And so the more we experiment and experience and express, then of course it follows that you will apply the things that Baba says in the right way. Now, it's very easy to say, you know, okay, there's Amrit Vela, there's Murli in the morning, there's a system of cleanliness, there's a particular diet, you know, and so you have all the check marks. But it might look like you're there from the outside, but once again, it is the process on the inside that is in need of and will ultimately be the result of the application of Gyan. And after the check marks with all of those things, now it's about relationships, it's about roles, it's about my abilities, it's about my capacity, and all of those things. And each one of those have to have or come under the application of Gyan, because it's going to be in all of these things and by the right application that the certificate, if you like, will come. Because maybe you could say that the only time that there is the applying of Gyan, I have to keep looking at the title accurately, is in Satyu. And that's wherein the knowledge no longer exists in the format that we know it today. And Baba said something interesting in this morning's Murli, that now is when the Sat Yugi, or the deity sovereignty, is being inaugurated. And so, of course, knowledge requires me to see time in a different way. Yes, the idea of the third eye and seeing things differently. And so it's like this platform of the confluence age that Baba has given us and has enabled us to see, as he does, you know, the whole of eternity, and to be able to see souls in that context. And I think that sometimes that once again, it's not, you know, knowledge isn't just information, even though we delight in the information about the big questions, the response to the big questions. But yesterday, sharing a Murli with someone, and there was the feeling of, you know, it's Baba's words. He's entrusted his words in our mouths. He allows us to vocalize his words. And, you know, it's a little bit like being a musician, that you can have someone who has learned the scales and they know all the notes, and they can maybe even play, whether on the saxophone or the violin or whatever. But you know the difference between someone who's just begun to learn something. They have the notes, they have, or a singer, they have the lyrics, and yet, you know, there's an element that's missing, you know. And what is that element? It's like, again, the difference, why we used to all come running on a daily basis when Daddy G would read the Murli, or when Daddy Janki would read the Murli in English. Because again, there was no discrepancy. They had that secret chord, you know. They say that that makes the difference. You know the difference. And I think the difference is that they have made the song or the piece of music their own. And I guess we could look at it in the same way in any art form, that we can just give the knowledge, we can share the points, but the authenticity of it, the truth of it, the reality of it, will be detectable to the degree that it has been inculcated into the soul to the degree that you have made it your own. As the words of the song go, God bless the child that has his own. And then I think that it's not so much, when I think of these topics that we all cover in terms of Gyan, that they seem to be, these little dualities, like love and law, the child and master, detached and loving. I'm sure you can come up with many more of them. And so it's not about finding a balance, but it's about knowing when to be one and when to be the other. And if you look, you will often find that in your journey that you sometimes err on the side of one versus the other. And we know what the law is like when it is being given to us by someone else. It could be the proverbial instrument or whoever, and the love is missing. Yeah. Then there's coldness, there's harshness. It seems to be that when I'm using one wrongly, or using one and not including the other element, then there will be pain, there will be suffering. And so, I was, mistakes are made, hurt is caused. And I was seeing even for my own self, and again, it's a long time ago, but where I had misunderstood, this is about using knowledge inaccurately. And I thought that in a particular situation that I was detached. And it was in relation to a relationship. And maybe I was some 8 years into Gyan at the time. And then I realized it's an interesting story, and it involved Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, whom some of you, being from Europe, will know of. She did the books Death and Dying, and Meeting with Her. And the realization came that it wasn't that I was detached, but that my heart had hardened. And so this required me to back up. It's a story for another time, but suffice to say that a number of years later, I was diagnosed with a particular ailment that is to do with a hardening in the heart. And that was the connection that I made. And that there are repercussions. If I get it wrong and I justify, maybe even in my ignorance, that it's okay to be detached, to forget the person, to not send them good wishes, not to connect. And so it also means that, or meant that, neither had I emerged forgiveness for that soul, for what they had, or what I had perceived that they had done. And so you can see where I was very remiss. And I have to say that in the realization of my mistake, and then this medical situation ensuing. But the nice thing is that there have been no symptoms despite the diagnoses, because that was like such a realization for me, and then endeavoring to change it, by never being found guilty of doing that again to anyone, whether in my past or in my present. And so I think that by adhering to Baba's laws, because, applying Gyan accurately means what? It simply means love. That's all. And you can then unfurl that or unpack that and see all of the ways that that applies. But with love, everything can be transformed. Knowledge, is love. And I sometimes say that I love because I know. And because I love, I know, therefore I love. And I love, therefore I don't need to know. Because ultimately that will be the result, will be a world in which there is only love. That is what the knowledge turns into. Everything is to do, I think, with Baba's knowledge, that he gives it to us, not forcing it or enforcing anything, but with great respect, so that we can gently not only see our inherent perfection, our inherent love, but all the scars that have developed throughout our many lifetimes. And he gives us the method through which to heal those, to remove those. So that then, because what did he say the other day? That the kind of covenant that we made was to transform the world. And, how do I know that I'm contributing? How do I know that I'm changing? And for me, one of the things is that, the inner dialogue will change. And once again, it will no longer be about punishing oneself, always fault finding about your own self. And so often when our criticism, etc., is about others, we're failing to see that it's coming from a hurt, unacknowledged, within our own selves. And so as I make these changes, then it should show up in terms of my relationships. Doesn't mean that different people will come into my orbit. They very well may do. But my way of dealing, and I won't use their failures or weaknesses to justify any expression of dislike or blame within my own self. I think that's one of the major things. And, applying Gyan means applying it in the right way. Once again, the beauty here, you can say knowledge is this, 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 and this, and this. But the application of it will take into consideration the uniqueness of every individual, the place and the time and the circumstances. And as you know, Baba doesn't, apply the same rule to each and every one. And so it also requires neutrality in my dealings. It requires insight. It requires maybe some foresight, the knowing particularly even when to offer advice and when not to say anything. It requires acceptance of others. It requires appreciation of others. And as mentioned before, that forgiveness, all these things. And so patiently and lovingly, day in, day out, Baba keeps washing us in this distilled water of knowledge that allows us to cleanse and to fortify our own virtues and qualities so that they can be brought into service of the vision that he has for the world, for the whole of humanity. And so once again, I think that it's about the experience of love, the expression of love, and good wishes. And so many times Baba tells us how we're inclined to make excuses. Well, I'm just an effort maker. And then he'll remind us that making the same mistake over and over and over again and saying you're an effort maker is not an effort maker, And so there's an easiness, or there should be an easiness, as he reminds us, the Brahman life is a life of pleasure. And so the pleasure is not for me about, we'll sit and we'll eat together, we'll have nice food and all the rest of it. But say, for example, love, the pleasure of love that Baba enables us to have. And I sometimes would ask about people's experience of love. And so they'll talk about the love that they have for their children, for their significant others, or whatever. And yet I know that if there's love, and I don't doubt that there's love, I won't just say everything's attachment, but if there's love, the love at the present time in this age will be filled with worry and concern and fear and of course to some degree possessiveness. And so the pleasure of love, won't have those things. The love that we experience as yogis is devoid of those things. It's devoid of fear. It's devoid of possessiveness, or any concerns. And so in that way, Baba tells us that this is a life of pleasure. So what else? What else can we say? Again, this inner dialogue that changes. I really feel that knowledge isn't a static thing. Baba's knowledge, if you want to say, is truth, but not even truth is static. And so it's again like the person learning the keys, learning the scale, and they may know it at one level, but 10 years down the line, they'll know it in a completely different way. It'll be automatic. They won't have to think, do, re, mi. They won't even need to consider that, or like driving a car. Most cars now probably are automatic, but when they were stick shift, then you had to concentrate and think, what goes where in the clutch and one thing and another. And so it is with Baba's knowledge. So it is with truth. The first day I came, I was told I was a soul. Okay, I get it. But do you think there's a difference now when I say I'm a soul? And when I said it then and when I say it now, or the application of it. So it's not that the information changes, but the truth changes to the extent that I have deepened it, within my own being. And so again, I look at applying Gyan accurately. I suppose that in very simple terms, it's always the movement towards love, and comprehension. Or as Daddy Janki used to say, that you should always, in relationships, move towards friendliness, And of course, we all know that whatever we're doing, I myself am the first recipient of whatever it is that I do, good, bad, or indifferent. So who am I doing it for? And Baba's clever, that yes, if I think I'm doing it for God, I might be more inspired. How he uses language that inspires us, but then you get behind it and it's something different. And this too for me, and then we'll finish in terms of the application of Gyan, of applying Gyan accurately, is because Gyan is for me to understand myself, to understand the Creator, and what it is that he's endeavoring to do in the context of creation. And I have perhaps to some degree remained a mystery to my own self. And of course, what we used hitherto was some form of ego. I don't mean arrogance, but that it was based on something material, perhaps, and that we were able to justify when we were angry or when we were feeling egoistic. And then the lovely thing is that knowledge, Baba's knowledge and yoga helps me to reveal my own deceptions to myself, and that I was busy deceiving myself, telling myself that some weakness of mine was actually a quality. And so I get to see that at the right time, when I'm willing to see it, because there has to be, that we realize only what we are prepared to know. When we're prepared to know something, then there'll be the realization. Have you had people in your life who've tried to tell you about your defects or your faults, but it was coming from a place of criticism, and you kind of just dug in and, or at best ignored them? But with Baba's knowledge, it's so gentle and it's so kind and it's so respectful that he enables us to be like nursemaids to our own selves, or to keep rebirthing our own selves so that we align with the things of knowledge that he's teaching us. So that's just a few thoughts. So I'm looking at the clock.
So yes, thank you so much for these deep sharings. It's really very important for all of us. Whatever you said, and I don't, I don't see any questions. But can you share a few things about your experiences with your relationship with daddies, especially Daddy Junkie?
She's at the heart of the matter. Yeah. Oops, did something happen again? Yeah. Daddy's my role model. You know, I had the great good fortune to meet her, you know, just after a couple of days. I was actually doing the course, and then it was during the days of Janamashtami, which I knew nothing about, right? I didn't come with any of that information. And anyway, what happened in that very first meeting with her, and it wasn't a one-on-one meeting per se, there was maybe about 10 or so other young Westerners in the room. And the connection with Daddy was in silence. Again, I didn't know much, if anything, about Drishti, but something happened in that room that made me uncomfortable. And once again, nobody else in the room had any sense of my discomfort and being a little bit rebellious by nature. And Daddy seemed to pick up on the vibe. As I say, nothing was being said. There was no interaction with anybody. And Daddy kind of picked up on the vibe. And she just turned and she looked at me and she made a gesture like this. And it said to me, you don't ever have to do anything that you don't want to do. And so in that instant, Daddy Janki had my heart, because I think that's one of the things that attracts us to others, is the feeling that they have understood us, that they've understood something very deep within us and have acknowledged it and approved it, right? So that was my first interaction with Daddy Janki. And then I wasn't a regular student. I would come and go and so on. And, you know, she would ask me, you know, why don't you come, you know, to the Murli? Remember I said I went to Madhavan, but I hadn't gone as a Brahmin. And she said, why don't you come more often? And I said, well, I don't like the Murli, but I like you, you know. And that was the case, that because I hadn't understood the Murli and I was hearing it through my filters. And it wasn't just a question that I didn't understand it, but it was how I understood it. And whoever this being was that was speaking the Murli, I didn't like some of the things they were saying. And whereas Daddy Janki, clear as a bell. You know? So she used to give class every morning before the Murli. And then many years later, according to drama, my great fortune, that you know, I'm giving you the short version of the story, but I ended up living with Daddy, me, Raw, the one least likely to And in those days, it was just Daddy and Genti Ben and Sudesh Ben and me, of all people. But a number of years later, in Madhaban, and Daddy was giving a class. We probably were, maybe we were, I don't even think we were Nam Shanti Bhavan. I think we might have still been in the meditation hall. And the question for me was, why do I have so much love for her? And I was very clear. It was not because of her love for me, but the realization why there was so much love for her was because everything I had ever wanted for my own self, even before Gyan, she embodied. The wise old lady that had more connection with younger people than her own generation and had not led a life that was dictated by society's norms. And so that was the realization that I was seeing everything good that I had ever wished for my own self manifest in her. And so that was, and it was a very lovely relationship. And a lot of my life's lessons. And when it comes to by example, then Daddy would be the example that I would try to follow, you know. And I was mentioning yesterday too, where her thing was, you know, in Sangam Yug, you have two jobs. You have to stitch your clothes for Sat Yug, which means following Gyan, which means following Srimat, and to stitch the divine family together in Sangam Yug. And so that was, so I have many slogans that would be from Daddy. And so a deep appreciation of how amazing these women were and what they would have had to have gone through, considering what was the norm in India of those days. Shining examples. And yeah, sometimes there's the feeling of missing them, but that's like any child that kind of is a little bit reluctant to step into its parents' shoes. But that's the thing that has to happen. You know, the next generation, fortunately, there's a generation between me and Daddy. So they have to step up first. But as each one steps up, it makes way for the next generation to step up too. And I mean that in not in terms of roles or necessarily, or but yes, responsibilities and being more clearly an example of what it is that they have seen. Yeah. But if you have any specific question, happy to answer it or attempt to answer it. How do you think one could apply Gyan inaccurately? No? Anyone? All right. So we finish with meditation, or?
Yeah, just before we finish, yes, well, whatever you shared was really very deep and wonderful. And I really like the last thing that you said about stitching the family, the divine family, which is very important.
Yeah.
And there is a question here about how to find your formula in your Brahmin life.
What do you mean, find your formula?
I don't know. That's a question here.
I'm maybe they can clarify, but this thing of sometimes seeing your own pattern, that you have a certain pattern, and then is the pattern that has been applied over a long period of time, is it consistent with where it is that you want to go, or is it just a habit, you know? And so sometimes the habit keeps me mundane, that sometimes to step out of the habit needs a little bit of courage, because otherwise you're only going to experience what you've always experienced. And so having the courage to change something, and this is the courage, the enthusiasm, the encouragement that that Baba is constantly giving us, isn't it? But what's the formula? And for me, it would come down to this thing again of, there's never an excuse. I'm not saying I do it, but this I know, that there's never an excuse not to love, because Baba has shown us the highest love, the holiest love, the complete love, and that in doing something less than that, I'm cheating myself. Or I'm simply saying, I'm a poor person. I'm a poor person, that I don't have, I don't have enough love, and that my dialogue is one of conflict or criticism or whatever. So I'm just showing I'm not very wealthy. I'm poor, and so the wealth, the spiritual wealth, will be apparent again in my ability to sustain myself and others, and to inspire, if that's the right word. Really, it's not so much inspire, but it's to get them to believe that they also have the capacity to become very wealthy, and that they too can sustain others.
Okay, it's clear.
Okay.
Yes, it's clear.
Yeah.
And there's if you can share briefly. Oops. There's something in my. There is another question, if you can answer it briefly. Can you elaborate about the perfect Avyakt stage? Is there a difference in Brahma Baba's role now and in 1969?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that's really something for one of our trans messengers. We like to think that, again, of consistency, because if you're talking about perfection, you can't go higher than perfection, right? So what are you asking? Did he become more perfect, or did he become less perfect? And so I would say that it's the same. It's us who, holding that vision, rise to our sameness, rise to our Bapsaman stage, our angelic stage. The whole question of Avyakt Bapdada is very interesting. Yeah.